This episode is sponsored by Bark Technologies. I am so grateful that we parents these days have a safer device option, and that is the Bark phone. The Bark phone was created for families who are looking to ramp up their child's online safety. It has parental controls built in and allows us to manage their entire digital experience and screen time and app access super easily. And now on to the episode. All right, so welcome to Scrolling to Death. Today I am joined by Kathleen Barlow, who is a mom, a teacher, and an advocate for online safety and for protecting kids. So thank you for joining me, Kathleen.
That's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me, Nikki.
Sure. So I'd like to just jump right in and talk about screens at school. And you taught middle school and high school since 2012, right?
Yeah, I started in New Hampshire. That's where I've lived most of my life. And I started teaching at a middle and high school charter school there. And that's when phones were just starting to come out. Like, I remember having a few students that seemed to be looking at their phones a lot. And I was like, what are they looking at? Like, it was still like that new for me. I don't even remember if I had a smartphone at the time, but I just remember thinking it was kind of weird. And it just, as the years went on, it just crept in more and more to the point where I was teaching. We moved to Utah a few years ago during COVID, and I was teaching at a middle school this past school year. And I just felt compelled that I needed to be doing something more because things were so bad. The students between phones and Chromebooks, everything. It was bad, and kids weren't learning. And I just was heartbroken to see what was happening. And so I ended up actually resigning a little bit early. I did give them a lot of notice. I felt badly about it, but I also felt like I need to be doing something. And I felt like I wasn't doing anything with my students. Like, they had no desire to connect with me. And that's usually that's always been one of my superpowers as a teacher, is connecting with students and relationships with them, because it's so important. They had no desire. They did not want to get to know me. I tried so hard. And so then I finally left because I thought I've got to do something more.
I'm so sorry you felt like you couldn't make a difference. And even having these students, what subject did you teach?
French.
Okay.
French, yeah.
So you had these kids for like an hour or so a day?
Yeah, I did. And it was an everyday schedule. So I did have them. It was about 50 minutes a day. And but they were just so connected to another world, most of them. And I also think that social media has a role in trying to separate kids from adult mentors and trying to make it seem like, that adult mentors don't count. They don't know what they're talking about. They're just Luddites and so it was really hard to break through those walls.
I'm sure. And there are TikToks that I've heard about, detailed TikToks that say, don't trust your parents, don't trust your teachers, trust us, trust TikTok. This is where you're going to get the real information and support.
Yes. And I remember reading this book. Have you heard of the book Hold On to Your Kids?
No.
There's Gabriel Mate, I think, and I can't remember another doctor, but one of the best parts of that book, it was so mind blowing to me. And just is that in all of human history before this overconnection that we've had, kids have been taught and mentored by the adults in their lives, right? But now we are in this place in history where kids are trying to raise each other. And it's not going well.
Right. No.
They don't know what, with their underdeveloped brains, and they don't know, and this lack of experience and wisdom, right? And perspective. And they're trying to raise each other on all these difficult subjects. And as we can see, it's not going well for a lot of kids.
Yeah. So you know what? I got a text message this morning from a contact I have in Vermont who works on these issues, and she texted me a photo of the book you just mentioned. And recommended it to me. So hey, I got to buy that book today.
It's so good. It's so good, and it really does. They talk about how traditions and values used to be passed down vertically, right, from one generation to the next. Yeah. And now kids are kind of trying to teach their values to each other in this horizontal way, right? Just across, and they're all in the same peer group, and it just it's not very effective.
Yeah, well, and social media companies are having such an influential role in teaching these children what they believe and who they are in not a productive way, because content that is harmful is actually prioritized on social media to teenagers who are vulnerable. So can we talk a little bit more about I want to dig into your experience in the classroom. What specific issues come to mind? Like, what were the worst things about the kids having access to their smartphones in class?
Well, I just felt over the years that I was becoming less and less interesting as a teacher, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I do not provide the dopamine that their screens provide for them. And so
Right.
I did feel like I was kind of becoming obsolete, and I think again, a narrative that's often spoken, in media is that school isn't necessary. We have Google. So why do we need school? Right. And I felt like that's what I was fighting against, was kids who were like, we don't need to pay attention to you. We have everything we need on these devices, and that reminds me, have you read the book Screen School by,
Yes, I love Screen School. So that's by Matt Miles and Joe Clement. Highly recommend.
Yes, and they're both teachers, so they have been in it for so long. I don't know if they still teach. Do you know?
Yeah, they do. I've interviewed them a couple of times, so really, I recommend. Yeah, listen in.
Oh, so good, so good. But they made an analogy in that book that has stuck with me. That they talk about, like, kind of using the analogy of a water pipe for kind of our brains, right? And so when information flows through, so say the water is flowing through as information. Mm-hmm. If there is no sediment on the bottom, so the sediment would be like foundational knowledge, right? If there's no sediment, then when the water flows through with more sediment, there's nothing for it to stick to. And so that sediment just flows out, right? So we need our kids to have, we all need foundational knowledge. That's how we learn, is by connecting with things that we already know. And so if kids are feeling like everything I need to know is on Google, then they don't have this sediment in their brains for other knowledge to stick to. Mm-hmm. They said it much better in their book than I did, but I just think that, and I think a lot of these kids, they don't have this foundational knowledge and they don't realize that they're missing it.
Yeah.
That's
and
really
one thing that comes up for me in our household is if we have a question and my kids don't know something and maybe I don't even know it, we talk about it first for at least several minutes, and then we don't even look it up. We call my dad or my mom, whoever I think like is, an elder person in our family that I think might know that answer, and we get information from them. And then if we need to, we can look it up. But that should be like after we've thought critically and had conversations and learned from other people's experiences. Yeah. But this critical thinking situation, losing all of that by having access to now not only Google, but the AI, ChatGPT, and they can look anything up.
Yeah. Yes. And I think some students are so used to having all that at their fingertips for testing, for everything else. If they're testing on Chromebooks, some kids are very adept at just cheating, and that's what they're used to doing, and so they don't know how to put in the work of actually studying for something. And it seems so difficult when they're used to just being constantly overstimulated by what they're looking at on their devices. The thought of trying to do something hard, because studying and learning is hard and it takes time, and it is not instant gratification, right? And so it's so hard for a lot of students to know to where to even begin. And so I would have students, and I only used Chromebooks one time in my classroom this past school year. And so they did get used to the fact that we didn't have phones. I told them, your phones are away from the moment you step into the classroom until the moment you leave. And I didn't used to do it that way, actually. In my schools in New Hampshire, before I had realized how bad things were getting, I would let my students be on their phones at the beginning of class and at the end of class. And then I started realizing over the years, that is the worst time for them to be on their phones, because they're missing out on talking to their neighbors and maybe developing a friendship in real life, So anyways, but back to the Chromebooks. So I didn't use Chromebooks. They were used to that. I had some students, and absenteeism was a big problem. I had some students that I would see very rarely, that they would come in and they'd be like, why can't you just give me the work on my Chromebook? I can do it on there. I know how to do it on there. And of course, what I wanted to say, or what I was thinking, was because they're cheating, and and it's not their fault. They have been given this technology, and that's what they've learned to do, And so it was very frustrating for some of my students when I didn't allow them to use Chromebooks.
Yeah. We can't let the computers think for us. So we touched on smartphones, but what about the school issued devices? For example, in my situation in kindergarten, they give kids iPads in class, and my youngest starts TK, so she'll be 4 next year, and she starts TK, and they give them iPads. And I said, I'm giving you a heads up now. I don't want my 4-year-old to be using an iPad at all. I don't think it's beneficial to their education at that age, and it should be a play-based situation. So what is your thoughts around our current use of school-issued devices in the classrooms?
I was not ever in a school in New Hampshire that had one-to-one devices. So
Oh,
I
good.
left teaching there in 2020. My family and I moved to Utah during COVID. And then I actually was taking some time off to be with my family. I have six children, and my youngest are twins that are 17, but they've really struggled over the years. They're doing so much better now. I would love to talk a little bit about their experience later, but
Yeah.
but so this particular school year, when I started teaching in Utah, it was a new district to me. It was a new school. I didn't know, but they did have one-to-one devices. So, like I said, I only used them one time, and I'll have to tell you what happened the time I used them. But what I noticed with a lot of my students, so my students were 7th, 8th, and 9th graders. I noticed that a lot of them, and particularly boys, it seemed, they didn't know how to write with the pen and pencil. Even when they would attempt it, it was like they didn't know how to hold a pencil or a pen. And it was so bizarre in that they just seemed like it made them tired, like they couldn't, like their muscles were not used to doing that.
Wow.
And I remember asking this, and sometimes then they would just give up and they'd put their heads on their desks. And it was, I'm telling you, Nikki, it was sad to see. But I remember asking one student one time, when did you guys get your Chromebooks, like your one-to-one? And he said, oh, kindergarten. And I was like, oh, well, that answers that for me. I mean, they have not learned how to write. And it seems so tiresome for them. It seems tiresome for them sometimes to take, like if I'd say, take your homework out. Homework was a very difficult thing. I really didn't have homework very often, but say something they've been working on. Can you take that paper out of your backpack? It was like such a chore for them to turn around and unzip their backpacks and take something out of their backpack. They would rather just not do it. They'd rather just lay their heads on their desk. And like, this is just such bizarre behavior, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I just couldn't understand it. So that was really discouraging. And I am a big proponent of paper to pen. I feel like that is how I clear my head. That's how I gather my thoughts. That's how I make connections, is by writing things down. And so I feel like that is such an important thing that a lot of kids are missing out on.
Yeah, agree. And so, Lynn, do you feel like kids retain more and learn better from paper rather than screens?
I mean, absolutely. Absolutely. 1000%. Yes. And I think that is such a big part of what they're missing and why they don't know how to study. They don't even know where to begin, because when they're trying to do it on a screen, it's not the same.
Yeah.
So can I tell you the story of the time I did use my Chromebooks?
Please. Okay. Yeah.
It was not great, but so it was the end of my, I had given my notice and I was going to be leaving.
We're having an earthquake. Hold on, Kathleen. There's an earthquake right now. Hold on.
Are you kidding?
Do you see it shaking?
Yeah.
Hold on. It's still going.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, I live in California, so I'm not totally, it doesn't freak me out too much.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Okay. I'm going to leave that in.
Okay. Yeah.
That was exciting. Okay. I'm so sorry. Start over.
No, that's fine. No. So it was, I had given my notice. I had told the principal at my school that I was leaving and that I needed to figure out something more to do to help schools with getting screens out. And I was exhausted and frustrated, to be honest, with my classes. One of the biggest rewards for teaching for me has always been my relationships and kids like learning and going, oh my gosh, Madame, thank you, for whatever, over the years, I've had a lot of students that have been appreciative of what I've taught them. And I just, this school year in particular, I just did not feel that at all. So I was exhausted. I was ready to be done. And so I had decided to let my students do a project on researching a French-speaking country, which is, a project I've done a number of times over the years. Do some research, do a Google slideshow, make a poster, do something. Kids don't usually want to do posters anymore, but I always offer that because I would love for them to do that. Yeah. And so I gave them a few days in class to do it, and the time just kept dragging out, and they were goofing off. They weren't getting stuff done on their Chromebooks. And they just kept saying, we need more time. We need more time. This isn't enough time. And I'm like, you guys have had plenty of time, right? But they're so used to doing this, I feel like now. And it's so hard for them to stay focused that they really can't get something done in a decent amount of time, So finally, I had some kids that were still working on their projects, but I had some that were ready to present. But I was like, you guys, during the presentations, there are not going to be Chromebooks out. Nobody is going to be looking at a Chromebook while your classmates are presenting. It's just disrespectful, right?
Yeah.
But I had these students who couldn't, it was like I'd let the cat out of the bag, and they could not stop opening their Chromebooks, playing games, looking at. So it was like playing whack-a-mole with these students, trying to get them off their Chromebooks, the ones who weren't presenting. And finally I just had a couple of kids that were just being they couldn't help themselves. And I know that that's not their fault. They couldn't help themselves. So finally I took their 2 Chromebooks, these 2 kids, and I said, you guys can pick these up from the office at the end of the day. And I didn't even know, I mean, I figured that was okay. Like I figured that they could get their Chromebooks taken away for the day. I just hadn't even thought about it. And again, I just don't typically use Chromebooks with students, so I wasn't familiar. But I felt like I was about to have a mutiny on my hands, like with this particular class. Like there were kids who were coming up to me at my desk and like, you cannot do this. They need those Chromebooks to learn. Class ended shortly after that. And I had the 2 Chromebooks. The students finally all left my classroom. I had the 2 Chromebooks that I was going to bring down to the office. I was just finishing up a few things. And I think less than 10 minutes later, one of the assistant principals came into my room and asked me for the Chromebooks. And I'm like, are you kidding? Like these kids would not like stay off them. And it was, really disrupting the class, blah, blah, blah. He's like, well, that's the policy. They can't have their Chromebooks taken away. They need them for their next classes. I know. Wow. And I just thought, what are these kids learning? They are learning. What did those 2 kids just learn? They learned that their Chromebooks are more important than anything. And that they can get them back. It doesn't matter how they behave with them or what they do, they're going to get them right back. I was so discouraged with that. And I was just like, wow, this has to change.
I'm so sorry. It sounds similar even to kids having phones at school. So we just got a new phone ban implemented. So the phones should be off and not used at all on campus, but the kids can still have it in their backpack. And we can't, I guess, legally take it away. Teachers can't take it away. So yeah, it's like, where does the importance lie and where does the responsibility lie? And I hear just from teacher after teacher, the struggling with enforcing and not having the backing. And that's...
Again, yes. I've talked to my husband about this many times as I've gone through the years and teaching in difficult experiences. And I was telling him how difficult it is as a teacher to be the enforcer, right? It is so hard for us to be the screens police because, and I wonder if this was in your podcast that I heard one of the guys from Screen School talk about like, what is a teenager's favorite possession? It's their phone, right? And so for teachers to be taking that away every day, you are setting that teacher up and the student for failure with their relationship because the student is going to be consistently pissed off at their teachers for taking their phones away. And it's a lose-lose. So I feel like, and I've been very involved since I left teaching. I became involved with, first I read The Anxious Generation, which I was like, yes, please. This is everything that I have been saying on a lot of deaf ears. Some people that are just like, well, yeah, there's nothing we can really do about it though, So I read The Anxious Generation. I found out about the smartphone free childhood. Are you familiar with that group?
Yeah. Yep.
And so I've joined that. I've been since connected to a number of different organizations, the Phone Free Schools Movement, Screen Time Action Network, Better Screen Time with Andrea Davis, so many Screen Strong. I mean, there's a lot of great organizations and I've really gotten some great connections with them since leaving the school.
Your perspective is so important and we need your voice in all of these organizations. Yeah. And I think parents who are listening need to understand what's truly happening at school when we allow our kids to have access to devices. And even the device use, however we decide to manage devices in our own home, trickles over to how they act at school.
I feel like Dr. Haidt was exactly correct that the only way to do this at schools is to have a bell-to-bell policy. And so it needs to be gone. And, there are yonder pouches, which I've heard have been successful in a lot of schools. I think that could be really great. I've also heard, some schools that haven't had as much success. And then Dr. Haidt's other suggestion is a phone locker, just a small phone locker to have. Like every homeroom teacher has a phone locker. I'm actually in the process with a partner of developing a product, a phone locker for schools. I do love that idea because it's out of sight, out of mind. And I think that is so important. Like the pouches are still in the kids' backpacks. And so they're still looking at those pouches going, oh man, what's going on in there? What notifications am I getting? What am I missing? I feel like when they're completely removed from them, it's great. But the thing is about the lockers, that the disadvantage to that is that the liability that some schools feel like, oh, we don't want to be responsible for holding on to that expensive property. But I still feel like it's workable with the lockers in that you can write into a cell phone policy. Students should not be bringing phones to school at all. But if they choose to bring them, then they will be put in these lockers, and we're not going to be liable for theft or damage or anything like that. So,
and I do feel like that is the only solution that truly works. But I think most schools are a few steps off of that. They're doing a bell-to-bell policy, but letting the kid have it, it just has to be off. And they're including watches and headphones and all those things in that policy, which I feel like is good, but they're going to see the issues. They're going to see that kids can't keep their hands off of it. There's no way. There's no way. It's too addictive. Jumping in here to tell you more about the Bark phone, which I believe is the safest option when and only when you feel your child needs access to a device. Please don't rush this decision, but when it's time, consider the Bark phone. Bark is built safe from the ground up and uses advanced AI to scan their text messages, their social media, images, videos, and even audio for threats like drug content, cyberbullying, even child sexual abuse material. The Bark phone actually doesn't even allow your child to take a nude image and save it to their phone. The effects of your children's tech use can be worrisome. It worries me. But tools like Bark can give you peace of mind. And if you are making the decision to go with an Android or an iPhone, please layer on the Bark monitoring app. It's high-tech parental monitoring. It scans their activities for harmful content. You can create screen time schedules, block certain websites and apps, and a ton more. More about Bark in the episode notes, but back to my conversation with Kathleen. And then when it comes to school-issued devices, one thing that has come up for me is what kids are accessing that's not related to the lesson. Mm-hmm. And I keep being told that teachers are keeping an eye on all the students as they're using them. And so if they're, the kid is redirected, if they access something they shouldn't. And is that something you feel like is reasonable or realistic?
Well, I think it seems counterintuitive to me of the relationship between a teacher and a student, right? Mm-hmm. Teachers and students should be having face-to-face relationships. And it was recommended to me when I went through my own little Chromebook debacle with my students in that project, that there is a program that we had at our school that we could monitor from our screen what kids were doing on their screens. I had no interest in that because I'm like, why? What? That doesn't make sense to me that I'm sitting on my screen watching what they're doing on their screens. Like we should be doing something together in real life, right? They have enough of screens and virtual relationships. They need to have as many actual relationships with people who can actually mentor them as possible. I just don't like that. And my students, I know they were doing all kinds of stuff on those few days that they were on their Chromebooks because I wasn't monitoring them. I actually was in the teacher's lounge one day and heard some teachers talking. They were doing a professional development day, but they could see what their students were doing with the sub on the computers. And so they were actually, but it was kind of almost like a bit of a joke. Like they were like, oh, I see what he's doing. I'm going to turn that off for him. And just kind of like it was just a back and forth game.
Wow.
And what a waste. I mean, what a waste of time. I just feel like,
I agree. And it's like trying to solve a technology issue with more technology, which is in this case not applicable. I know there's a lot of great AI is a tough one, but there's some good AI tools that are being developed to help some of the issues online. But this is not one of those cases where I feel like the teacher should be given technology to manage the kids' technology. Why don't we just take away the distraction and then stay focused or keep it face to face as much as possible?
Yes. Can I just tell you, this is like an awesome analogy that I have just thought of so many times. So I don't know if you've heard of the book Upstream it's either Chip or Matt Heath. I should have gotten these books straight, but it's so good. And so the premise of they're brothers, and they actually both wrote a book called Switch that I read, and it's kind of about how to change your leadership strategies and how to implement change, right, in leadership.
Yeah.
But then I saw this book Upstream, and so it starts with this story, which you've probably heard of. There's like a couple of guys, they're walking along a riverbank, right, and they're just enjoying. They're about to go have a lunch together. And then all of a sudden around this river bend comes this kid and he is drowning in the river. And so they immediately jump in, they grab the kid, they pull him out. And as soon as they do that, there's another kid coming around the riverbed drowning. So they go and get him, they pull him out. And then all of a sudden, one of the guys just decides he gets out of the river and he starts walking upstream. And the other guy's like, wait, there's more kids coming. They're drowning. What are you doing? You need to help me. And he's like, I'm going to find out why all those kids are drowning falling in the river and drowning. And I feel like this is just, when I see technology in our kids, I just see this, we are not thinking upstream, right? And we need to be thinking upstream. Upstream would be taking away the tech rather than trying to constantly put out fires that we do not have enough. We can't solve them all. There are so many things happening that if we were to just take screens out of schools, for example, that is going to solve so many problems, or at least greatly reduce a lot of them in schools.
Yeah. Okay. So, my life is just so funny sometimes. I just heard that story for the first time, the upstream analogy, last week when I was in DC at the National Center on Sexual Exploitation, NCOSE. They had a global summit, and Dawn Hawkins there, I think the CEO, she told that exact story. And that was the first time. So now I've heard it twice in 2 weeks.
How funny.
And
Cool.
but I wanted to let you tell it so I can have listeners understand that. I think it's so important. I know a lot of parents care a lot about these issues, but we're dealing with districts that are very tech heavy and that really are being pushed to these new educational apps and these new devices that kids need to be using. And so, do you have any advice for parents? And then after this, I want to get to some background on your family and your managing screen use with your family. But do you have advice for parents on how we can influence our schools to like back off on the technology?
Yeah. Well, I first think that we as parents and families need to think about, because the tech companies are promising better results, right? That our kids are going to be smarter from all this tech. They're going to be better off. They're going to be well equipped to go into some great technological career, right?
And are they?
And they're not. That's the thing.
Right.
And I've been actually thinking about this myself. Like, is there any evidence that this is happening? All I see is that kids are declining year by year. They are declining in school and out of school. They're declining academically. They're declining. Obviously, their mental health is horrific compared to any other time in history. Their emotional health, their social skills. This is all getting worse. And so we need to ask ourselves, what is tech actually helping? Nothing. And so but as far as getting into your schools and trying to implement change, I mean, this is what I am right now starting my own little organization called Screens Out of Schools. And it's just a very baby organization. I haven't really reached out to schools yet, but I'm trying to get my ducks in a row. And so I've been thinking a lot about this. What is the first step? And I think the first step is parents getting together, right? If you can find even a few other sets of parents or families in your community that feel the same way, get with them. This is going to help your kids because they're going to know that they're not the only ones that aren't on tech. And then it's also going to help as far as trying to make a bit of a difference and influence at school, right? And the phone-free school movement, has an administrator toolkit that they have just rolled out that takes you step by step. And anybody can get this if you go to their website, but it takes you step by step from the beginning of like a letter to maybe staff and teachers and say, this is what we're going to do. A letter to families and saying, this is what we're going to do. Surveys have been really helpful. My friend Andrea Davis from Better Screen Time did surveys that have helped just to kind of get the vibe for what students are thinking, what parents and teachers are thinking. And actually in Park City, Utah, they are trying to, the smartphone free childhood movement that I'm a part of, we have our little Utah group, and there's some women in Park City that are doing amazing things trying to get phones out of schools in their district. And they found from a survey that 85% of parents were on board with phone bans. And so I feel like we have a small minority of parents that are often more vocal about it, that don't want this to happen. But I think most parents are at the point that they realize, okay, yes, something has to change. Yeah. So I think step by step, it's the little things, but being consistent and following up with schools and teachers and again, members of your own community to try to band together. It's like Dr. Haidt said, this has to be a collective action. Yeah.
It's hard to find personally parents that feel similarly about, well, you know what, phones in schools, I think we're good. Like, I think parents, when you lay out the research and you understand that I think a lot of parents have an issue where if my child is in a safety situation like a shooting, I need them to be able to get a hold of me. But when you have that, break that down and have that discussion about, does that phone actually make them safer in that situation? And the answer is no. And it actually makes them more unsafe. I think there's a lot of parents, like we can get parents on board, the majority of parents. But when it comes to the overuse of the school issued devices and the inability for schools to really lock them down, to not have access to all the distracting areas of the device, that has been harder, in my opinion, to get parents to understand. And so I'm working on, and why don't we compare resources separately, but I'm working on an episode all about like the myth of school issued devices or the myth of device learning, and breaking down all that research about we don't actually learn better from devices, and it's not going well, us pushing devices on the kids. You know, we're dumber than ever, we're less confident than ever, all these things. And no one's saying no devices. No one's saying, you know, kids don't need to ever use a device in class, but there's certain subjects where it's helpful, and there's a certain age when it's appropriate at the right timing to introduce it with safeguards and with conversations. That's not currently happening. Our option shouldn't only be to send our kids to an expensive private school that like Waldorf, that doesn't give them devices until 7th or 8th grade. Like that can't be my only option.
Indicative, right? When we see like Zuckerberg went to a school in my state of New Hampshire, Phillips Exeter Academy. That is one of the top private schools in the nation. And, you know, it's very, very, very low tech. And I think, yes, there is a place for technology in our classrooms, but computer labs, I think, are the way to go. You know, even if you have a cart in your classroom that, you know, I think computer labs and just having it, you know, its own separate space would be ideal. We're being sold this bill of goods that our kids need to be on technology all the time so that they can learn technology. But that doesn't make any sense. I mean, none of us were on technology, and we all learned it. Of course, some of us better than others.
Yeah. And this myth about device readiness, like kids need to be on devices when they're little in order to learn, you know, to engage in society successfully, which is just silly, because these devices are made to be, I mean, our toddlers pick them up and can figure them out. So that won't be a problem when they're teenagers and getting used to the devices. Okay. So let's move to talk a little bit about your family. So you have 6 kids and 3 grandkids, right?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
Okay.
And so my kids span from, you know, I have 2 millennial kids, 4 Gen Z kids, and then I have my 3 grandkids that are little Gen Alpha, right? And so it has been so interesting. In fact, we're on this family vacation right now where we're all in this cabin together. And it makes me cry because I love seeing all these generations together, right? My husband and I are Gen X. We have millennials in the house. We have Gen Z kids. We have significant others with us. We have in-laws with us. And then we have our 3 little grandkids. And all of us together, we have been just having a blast. If you saw what the front room of our cabin looks like right now, the kitchen table has been commandeered. It is full of diamond art and puzzles and these sticker things. I just brought everything I could think of. I don't know if you've heard of the book Opt-Out Family by Eric Lochner.
No.
Sorry, it's new and it's really good. But she talks about how we and families need to be, or try to be, as enticing as the tech is to our kids, as far as trying to get them interested in doing these normal, healthy, low dopamine activities, right? So I had a laundry basket full of like books, just in case somebody needed to read a book. And coincidentally, my daughter's partner, his Kindle wouldn't work, and so he didn't have a book to read. And I'm like, oh, well, I have some books. So he found a great book that he was reading out in the hammock, you know? So I feel like we've had this really awesome experience, board games. You know, we're out watching birds. One of my daughters is obsessed with bird watching, and we've just been having so much fun together and very little screen time. We did watch a movie together one night, which was also awesome. But most of what we've been doing is off screens, and this is a culture change for my family. So it's been so awesome to see.
Yeah,
you know?
I love to hear that. And it's interesting timing, because this morning my episode that dropped is with Jenna Lee Dillon, and she wrote a book called Look Up. It's a wild and screen-freed roadmap to enjoying travel with kids. So she's been on like 100+ trips with her daughter, all screen-free, and she talks about how important that is. So
that's so cool.
Yeah, it's so cool. And And she has such good tips for removing the devices and enjoying the journey in addition to the destination without devices on vacation. So you can really make those memories.
Can I say though, I think one of the hardest things for parents, especially of young kids today, is that they have the option. They have this option that is so easy. And it is so easy to put a device in front of a kid and keep them quiet, at least temporarily. And so I feel, and I did it with my kids with Teletubbies and, but it was a much different thing, right? With much slower screen time. There were starts and ends to the shows my kids watched. Right. But now parents have this very easy babysitter, and it's hard not to take advantage of that sometimes, But
it's so easy and also so harmful because most of what they're accessing on there is addictive or has ads, or if it's YouTube Kids or YouTube, it's definitely harmful and serving inappropriate content. But even if you find a educational app, there are very few, you're removing anything outside of that device from their purview. They're not engaging with anyone. They're using only two senses, audio and visual. And what those little kids need for their brain development is face-to-face interaction. That's what builds their brain. And so
pay now or pay later. That's really what I think about. It really is.
Pay now or pay later. Exactly. How has the journey been with your you have 17-year-old twins. So how has that been? Because they've been going through this whole issue in real time.
Yeah. So, I do say I'm not the type of person to have a lot of regrets. I don't typically look back on my life and go, oh, I just regret. I wish I coulda, shoulda, woulda. That's just not how my mind usually works. But I do have this huge regret that I gave my kids these devices. I gave them all to them as soon as they were old enough, because that's what it was like. My oldest is 30. That's what we did. The big Christmas present was some kind of technology every year for years, until I started realizing, wait, what am I doing? What is happening? Right. So by the time we got to my youngest, who are 17, they're actually almost 18, and they're girls, and they've struggled a lot with a lot of things that a lot of kids are struggling with these days. As I've learned more and more, I would say in the past half dozen years, and as I have kind of put aside as much as I could in my own life, like full-time teaching. My husband and I actually had a cake business when we lived in New Hampshire that we did as we were trying to raise all these kids, and it was nuts, And so as I've tried to simplify so that I could focus these last years on my kids, I have just had this pit in my gut, like, why do these girls in particular, because they're the only ones left at home, why do they still have smartphones when I know how damaging they are? And I know that they have a lot of skills that they still need to learn in order to become successful adults, And so I've tried screen resets in January 2022. My whole family and everybody agreed to do this 1 month long screen reset with me, where we took everything off the phones. Everyone still had phones. We took everything off, but the kids, like my oldest son and his wife, my two grandsons, they took them off screens for the month. And what happened as a result, there were some amazing things, right? Having one of my kids, perfect attendance at school during that month, straight A's, for the new semester, all these things. They were talking together in the car. They were playing the alphabet game while we were driving places, instead of just sitting on their phones. One of my kids, who's very, very creative, said that they felt like they were getting some of their creativity back because they weren't constantly consuming. They were creating, and they weren't relying on other people to give them ideas. That happened. The month was over, and slowly you just slip back in. We've never slipped back to what we were at in that January 22. I feel like since that time, my biggest strength, I feel like, is I'm not going to give up. I am not going to give up on this with my family or with anybody. And so slowly we have shifted our family culture in a lot of ways. We don't have phones out at the dinner table anymore. We don't have phones out while we're talking to people. We enjoy talking to each other and doing actual physical activities more than just sitting on our phones, right? So there has been a lot of good that's come from that reset. We did another reset, actually the next January. I decided, let's all get flip phones for the month. Yeah. And we're going to try to do that. That was a disaster. And I was the worst at it, because we all had to change our numbers. And my kids are like, Mom, you're on your phone more than anybody, because I do use it as a tool. But all of these things have helped our family just become more intentional and thoughtful and realize and look around and go, what kind of world are we living in? Like where everywhere you look, people are just looking down. Nobody is looking at each other. I shouldn't say nobody, but a lot of people, So anyway, so finally in 2020, well, I guess at the beginning of this year, 2024, I just couldn't take it anymore. I said, I cannot keep supplying this drug to my 17-year-olds. And so we got them pinwheel phones, which are one of the options for dumb phones. It has not been ideal. It's messed up our family chat. It's messed up the photos on there are terrible. So they say, there are a lot of things that aren't great about that pinwheel phone. We've had technical issues that we've had to resolve. Some of them haven't resolved, but I feel like this is teaching them and all of us that we can figure things out. We can problem solve. We can think about things, and everything doesn't have to be super easy in our lives.
I love
right?
that. Yes.
So it's been about 7 months, I think, that my girls have had these phones, and they're surviving. And I feel like I've seen how they are doing better because of it. And I've seen instances in their jobs. They are hard workers. They work at the same little soda shop in our community, and they are working hard, and they see the other kids sometimes on their phones during their shifts, or they'll come into a shift, my daughters, and the place is a disaster, and the kids that are working are on their phones, and so they are seeing it in real life, like, oh my gosh, we are glad that we're not addicted like so many kids are,
Thank you so much for sharing that, because I think a lot of parents believe that if they've given the full-blown smartphone, the iPhone, that they can't go back. Yes, you can. Yes, you can. And it might be hard, and there's going to be, issues in the transition, but that you're a testament to it can be done. I also am a huge believer in stop making it so easy. Like I don't even have a case on my phone because I want it to be slippery, or I don't have that little pop socket on the back so I can be on it all the time. I barely use my headphones. I don't have a watch, so I'm not getting dinged all the time. Like, don't make it easy for yourself. If you make it uncomfortable and difficult, you're going to use the technology less, which is better. We're not supposed to be using this technology constantly as parents and mirroring for our children. So
I think the biggest issue that I saw at school with kids, and I've talked to other teachers about this, is they are not used to feeling discomfort. And when they do feel it, they want to escape it as soon as possible. And so that the easiest escape is into their screens.
Yep. And those are such important skills that they need to build. And whether it's just distracting themselves with social media feed or texting their mom that someone was mean to them, like they're okay. They need to work through those issues, and they have people at school they can go to if they're having an issue, and they need to learn how to access their community as well, and sit with uncomfortable feelings, because life is uncomfortable most of the time. Oh my gosh, this has been such a great conversation. Do you have any other takeaways for parents that we didn't cover yet?
Sometimes we're not saying, when we say take away the phones, is that you can't just take them away and say, good luck, kids, right? I mean, there has to be a plan in place. And for me, as I've tried to reel back from media in our home over these last years, it's been very deliberate, and it's taken hours of time and planning. And it does take time, not to scare people to not do it, because I know a lot of people don't have that kind of time. I had to quit my job to find that kind of time. And so I understand it is so hard to do, but it can be done, and it can be done incrementally, I believe. Like, some people are like, you've just got to go cold turkey and that's it. And then when people try that and it doesn't work, then they're discouraged and they give up. And I feel like, and this is Andrea Davis from Better Screen Time, that's her message, is it's never too late, and you can start by doing small things, right? And so I think, yes, giving kids chances to play and to be independent are huge. And can I tell you a quick story of something that happened to one of my 17-year-olds recently? Okay, so she has two birds, and she was going to get their nails trimmed. And she loves animals more than anything. And it's been very emotionally supportive for her to have a bunch of animals in her home. So she was going to bring them to the bird place to get their nails trimmed. And I had gone with her a number of times before. She'd never been by herself. And I was nervous for her to go, but I'm not kidding you. The morning that she was leaving, or the afternoon, as she was leaving, I was thinking I should just rearrange my schedule so I can go with her. I'm thinking in my head. But then I was thinking of Lenora Skenazy. I had just that morning finished her book, Free Range Kids.
Yeah.
where she talks about you've got to let them do things and be uncomfortable yourself in it, right? So I let her go. About 40 minutes later, she called me and she said, Mom, my phone is, and this is now she has her dumb phone.
Yeah.
I shouldn't call it dumb phone, but she said, my phone is at 1%. I am completely lost and I don't know what to do. I don't know how to get home and I don't know how to get to the bird place. And then I hear click and that was it. And I was like so panicked for her because she has struggled, emotionally with a lot of things over the years. And she's growing so much. But I was like, oh my gosh, I can't be there for her. And I didn't know what to do. And I didn't, I was kind of stunned. Like, what can I possibly do? I can't go searching for her. I have no idea where she is.
Yeah.
And so long story short, about 40 minutes after that, she called and she had found the charger to their new phone. There was one in the car that she had found in the back. I was hoping she'd go to a gas station or something, but I also knew that she was, yes, but I knew she was probably also crying and that she probably would not do it. And she didn't want to do it. So I'm hoping she'd get to that point at some point that she would, but she found the charger she was able to contact me and say, Mom, I found some landmarks that were familiar and I'm almost home. And I was like, I couldn't believe it. And she got home and she grew that day. She grew. She learned that she could rely on herself and that she could get herself out of a difficult situation. And that is what I feel like so many of our kids aren't getting those situations. And these girls, my 17-year-olds are getting some of these situations a little late, but they're getting them. And so I'm so happy about that.
Oh, Kathleen, I hope you feel really good about that because that's such an important lesson. And that's a lot of our need is to want to be there for our kids 24/7 and help guide them through things. But age appropriately, we need to start letting them do things on their own without a device or just with a very, very simple device that doesn't distract them, but is there for emergencies only.
Becoming part of this movement, it really is a growing movement. You should definitely check out the Smartphone Free Childhood. You can go to that website. It started in the UK some months ago and it blew up over there. And so we have started it here as of May. And they have so many resources. You can connect with people in your own state. We're getting like individual state groups. And we do meet on WhatsApp, which is not ideal for a lot of us, but it has enabled us to be able to connect and share a lot of resources and just support. We're supporting each other, not only in getting screens out, but in connecting our own little communities and doing things within our own communities. Like I had been wanting to invite my neighborhood to night rides. My husband and I go on night rides on our mountain bikes a lot and we love it. And we think everyone should try it. And I've been wanting to invite my neighborhood, but I've been kind of afraid to do it. And there was another organization called Feed the Children that I've been kind of involved with. And they had this challenge, like, do something in your community, invite some people in your community to do something together in real life. So I finally invited my neighborhood and we've actually had 5 Friday night, I call them Friday night lights. We've had 5 bike rides with our neighbors and all different ages and abilities. And we're all working together and just experiencing nature. It's been amazing.
Oh, that's so nice. Okay. So that website is smartphonefreechildhoodus.com for smartphone free childhood. And I signed up and then I feel like I dropped the ball with the WhatsApp thing. So I am going to get back involved in that.
Oh yeah.
And then you're developing. Okay, good. And then you're developing an organization called Screens Out of Schools so we can follow up with listeners when that's ready to go. But I really thank you so much for speaking up. And I know this issue of screens in school is like complicated and deeply rooted in profits for big tech. And it can be hard to crack this and change minds around this and change society's preset conditioning around this. But I'm in awe of people like you who take on the challenge and I'm on board as well. So thank you so much, Kathleen, for being here.
Thank you so much, Nikki. It's been a pleasure.